If I could have a warm welcome for our dear friend, Steve Pamon.
So first of all, I just can't thank John enough for the pleasure and the honor of standing before you guys. I have to say, I was much more comfortable in front of 27 people than I am in front of this room. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a talker, but I specialize in doing things in really small groups because I try to make it very personal. Before we bring up our distinguished panelists to really talk about what it takes to go to the next level, I wanted to share with you just a couple of thoughts. First off, you really truly have to appreciate what you all have been able to pull together here at MLT. A lot of people talk about doing something, but what John, the team, and everyone in this room has put together is actions. And actions speak louder than words. And education is the key. I tell people this all the time. One of the biggest questions I get is people say, well, wait a minute, for what you do you need an MBA? Do you need to have gone to Morehouse? Do you need that type of education? And I tell people all the time, the opportunity cost of knowing something only comes when you're faced with that problem. And then you can't go back and relearn it. And you might be able to lose a job, you'll spend your money, but knowledge is everlasting. So don't ever let, particularly young people of color, don't ever let anybody ask you, do you need education? There was a time when we were prevented from achieving education. There was a time that we were prevented from sharing knowledge with one another. If they didn't think it was valuable, they wouldn't have set up those institutions to prevent it. So now you have this opportunity. Don't let it stop with a formal education. Share it amongst yourselves. Talk to your peers, and never, ever stop learning. And then last but not least, I wanted to share with you what I thought was the biggest lesson in my life in terms of how I'm able to transition from all these opportunities, which were a blessing. And it actually didn't start off with a formal education. It was a very informal education. As John mentioned, my father was a Chicago police officer, South Side, very tough man. Our bond was the movies. We used to get together and go to the movies every weekend sometimes. And if you know what the 80s were like in Chicago, there wasn't a lot of multiplex movie theaters where I grew up. You went to the 4 o'clock show, the 6 o'clock show, or the 8 o'clock show. Now, granted, my father, like myself, was a talkative person. He picked me up at 2 o'clock. I would think we were going to the 4 o'clock show. Sometimes we wouldn't make it into the movie theater until 8 o'clock that night. Why? Because he would stop and talk to every single person along the way. He didn't care what you did, where you were, he was going to talk to you. And honestly, I tell you, as a young child, it used to frustrate me because I used to want that time for me. And candidly, one day, you know, as all teenagers do, I got up the courage to tell him, yo, Pop, why don't you chill? Like, can we just go to the movies? Like, it's a simple thing. You, me, theater. It's not hard. So at the end of the day, though, you know what he did? I literally remember this. He opened up his jacket, and he used to have a shoulder holster. And it was, you know, I tell people all the time, it was over a meal at a restaurant, which actually was Popeyes, but at that time, I really thought that was a restaurant. Literally, no joke. I was like, okay, I get to order soda, don't tell Mom, it's all good. But he opened up his jacket, and he reached inside, and he pointed to his gun. And he told me, and I won't use the exact wording that he did, he said, let me tell you something. He said, how many bullets in this gun? And I was a smart aleck, so I said, well, you know, 6. And he used a different word, but I'll just substitute people. He said, how many people you think out here on these streets? And he looked at me and he said, a lot more than 6. So don't you ever think this gun and this badge and these bullets is what's keeping you safe out here. Because in the end, it's not. What's keeping you safe is your heart, is your mind, and more importantly, it's your spirit. And he said, you think I'm out here just talking to everybody. He said, no, I'm out here making friends. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep you safe out here on the south side of Chicago. So I tell people this all the time, and I didn't get it right then, but I've gotten it through life. Relationships matter. It's not about networking up. It's not about networking laterally. It's not just about helping people for the sake of being altruistic. There are a lot more than 6 people out here. Don't ever confuse your position with your power. Okay? So at the end of the day, you're only as powerful as your gift, and your gift is the only thing you can give. Don't let anybody tell you you're not enough. All you have to be is nice. And I tell people this all the time. Being nice is one of the most underrated qualities of a human being. John Rice, John Stevens, who obviously became John Legend, I knew them before this. So now it's easy, right? Dig your well before you're thirsty and just be nice. That's it. So on that note, I don't want to stand in the way of what's going to be a brilliant discussion with 3 very, very powerful panelists, and I'd like to bring them to the stage right now. The first is the Vice President of Marketing for Potato Chip and Value Brands at PepsiCo, Sadira Furlow. The second is an extremely powerful brother who's the VP of Development and Partnerships at CoStar. Welcome, Martin Johnson. And last, but extremely certainly not least, Marta Martinez from Google. Okay. All right, this is going to be a great, great discussion. I had the pleasure of meeting the panelists beforehand. Sadira, I actually want to start with you. You've had a tremendous career. Obviously, you've been able to touch and impact so many different brands. You know, obviously your kicks are way cool. Everybody knows that. I just want to talk a little bit about personal clarity, because that's part of the MLT playbook. How do you navigate all of these different opportunities, but yet still remain clear about your purpose and goals?
It's a great question. There's this mantra that I have found along the way on the journey that's called trust your magic and protect your dopeness. And when I think about that and trusting your magic, there is something that is uniquely special about all of us, about me, about all of us up here. In your onlyness, that is so powerful, because no one can be you better than you. Mm-hmm. And in that your journey, the lens that you've acquired as you've gone along your walk, the toolbox that you have created as you've gone on your journey, that presents you with a unique set of tools as you go and face problems to be able to solve it a lot differently than others in the room, that they're not going to be able to do. There's something magical about that. And if you allow people along the way to chip away at that and start to change yourself to become like everybody else, you're actually losing your value. Your value to be at that table and say, hey, I'm the only one in the room that's had this walk, so you might have the only solution to take something from good to great. And then this idea around trust your dopeness. Like, just because you don't know me doesn't mean I don't know myself. I know me. I know what I'm capable of. I know the trials that have become treasures, that have become testimonies that I've seen. And so because I know what I'm capable of, it's like you got to give yourself that pep talk of like, I'm dope. I know I'm dope. I've accomplished a whole lot, and just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean that I can't show up in that way. Yeah. And it sounds easy, but even still at this point in my career, that's something that I come back to. And I'll tell you a story really quickly. I found myself in this situation in 2013. I was 34. I had just accepted God in my life. I was starting this walk. Life just started to feel like it was settling in. And I was running business development. And we won the Verizon business. And the owners of the company said, we want you to move to New York. We need you to go open the New York office for this piece of business. And now at 34, I wasn't thinking New York was going to be like Carrie Bradshaw in Sex and the City. And I was single, and that's not what, I had in mind. And I was scared. I was like, I just started this walk. I don't know how this God thing works. Am I going to lose it if I go to New York? Seriously, right? Some of you believers, like,
New York,
I didn't
hell.
know. I didn't know how it works. Yeah. And so I really thought about that. And I'm like, I've never opened an office. I went to school to be an orthopedic surgeon. I played sports. I ended up in advertising. What do I know about opening an office in New York City where the greats are? And so there's a lot of fear. And I remember a conversation with my dad and my friends, and my dad said, hey, you can always come home. And it was that you can always come home and your friends of like, you got this. Like, you've done so many different things. Like, you can absolutely go do this. And so it was that fear, that voice of just like quieting it down and saying yes. And that yes in 2013 has led to so many other yeses in the past 6 years that I could have never imagined. It's led me to switching careers, to joining PepsiCo, to breaking the internet with a Super Bowl spot, to launching a purpose-driven brand that did $250 million in year one, Life Water, to moving to Chicago and transforming the way we market nutrition brands and becoming a CMO, to 3 months ago moving to Texas to lead and steward the #1 snack brand, Lay's. And that one yes in 2013 about going to open an office in New York has led to all of that. So what I'd encourage you is remind yourselves to trust your magic. Where you're at, there's something magical about you, and to always remember your dopeness.
Absolutely. Wow. That's incredible. You really are like the Beyonce of marketing. And trust me, I know. I can tell you.
I'm ready.
Yeah, listen, I'll text her. I'll text her in a few. Speaking of Beyonce, let me move to the Jay-Z of business, Martin. I will say, and doing my research on this brother, it was so apparent the excellence that is displayed in every single move this man has made. And one of the things that really struck me in the conversation ahead of time when you talked is just the grace and the style that you moved. It was a very nonchalant manner. And so as you went from Duke to Deloitte and you had all these giant clients and obviously navigated the senior leadership of multiple Fortune 500 corporations, just if you could talk a little bit on how you managed to move with grace in that network and just frankly, how that network really helped you.
Sure, thank you. So for me, it started pretty young. My father, who was a professor at the University of Maryland, instilled a heavy work ethic in me at a young age. So if some of you see my profile on LinkedIn, I was a paper boy, 8 years old, and by the time I was 11, I had several paper routes throughout my town in Columbia, Maryland. And back then, there were no electronic payments, so I had to go door to door and collect my $7.63 from every customer. So here I am, this little kid. My dad would drop me off, and I'd go door to door. And early on, I get to know these parents. I get to know their kids. I became a fixture in their families almost because I'd be there every month, year over year. And so it started there. And so that was the first clue. As I moved throughout my career, the biggest impact on me as far as networking and playbook, as we've mentioned, has been Deloitte. And that's where it really started to sink in for me. I had a very powerful set of mentors, and some of the names you've heard before, like Stanley Porter and Lovey Jackson and Linda Solomon. I mean, these were folks that would pull me aside and a lot of my peers aside and say, this is consulting. There was a lot that I learned in business school that would say, okay, here's what you need to do, and here's how you crack a case, here's how you present yourself. But until you're actually sitting in front of those clients, and I'm sure many of you have been there, you don't really know. And so you need those mentors to pull you aside and say, here's how you do it. Here's the unwritten rule. Here's how, I like your tie, but maybe that's not what you want to wear next time. All these types of things that really play off. Now, one thing I did want to share with you is that as, I don't want to say regimented, but it was very secure in Deloitte. I knew approximately how many years it would take to move from senior consultant to manager, approximately how many years it should take to become a senior manager and then on to partner. If something didn't quite work out, you're maybe up or out, or maybe you'll choose something else. So I left Deloitte after about 6 years and moved on to Visa, who was a client of mine. Now, this is a completely different organization at the time because it wasn't a public company. It was an association owned by 22,000 banks. There was no playbook. There weren't many people like me, and there was no progression chart or metric that I could even imagine. And so what I had to do was really create my own playbook. I took some of the learnings from my youth, my learnings from Deloitte, and every day, I had to go in there and think about, okay, how am I going to get this done? What is my path? Who do I rely on? I had to go back to friends from business school and folks at Deloitte to help me. But at Visa, I was the lone person. I was trying to figure it out. How many of you have been in that kind of a situation? It's so it's real. And so luckily, Visa was very entrepreneurial at the time. And so because I didn't have that playbook and no one was saying to me, okay, it's going to take you this amount of years to become a director or this amount of years to become a VP, I just ran with it. I just went on my gut and said, okay, here's an opportunity. I was working with the state governments, and I said, okay, well, maybe I'll expand that to the federal government. Maybe I'll expand that to the universities. And I just ran for it. And I asked for forgiveness later if it didn't work out. And thankfully, it did. And so what I wanted to share with you and make sure that I instill in you, and hopefully you can take a few excerpts from this, is that, sometimes you have the playbook, but the playbook's going to shift. And I could talk for hours about how many times it shifted for me, but just remember, you have to stay true to yourself, remember what you learned, and do those tweaks, and trust your gut, and just go for it.
Wow, that's profound, brother. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, absolutely. So we've heard a bit from, Beyonce and Jay, and I want to move it over to the Rihanna of the internet world. In all seriousness, Marta, you've been sort of on the leading edge of a lot of things, right? And I think, a lot of us who've had traditional careers wonder, how do you stay so abreast of things? Like, how did you manage to get ahead of the curve? And I know one of the things that comes to mind with you is balance. Yeah. Because you were a competitive gymnast. You obviously, went to school in Europe. And so you have a real balanced mindset. But if you can, speak to how you've been able to maintain that balance, but yet still sort of stay ahead of everything.
So it's interesting because I didn't have a plan at the beginning. I grew up and I was the first woman in my family to ever consider going to college. I grew up I was born in a dictatorship, and then the country opened. My mom never went to college. She was raised to marry well, and her brother went to college and became a doctor. And so she didn't know at the time she was a feminist, and she raised my sister and I to go to college, be strong, and be independent. And I always wonder, what do I want to be when I grow up? And what is it that I want to be when I grow up? And the truth is, I still wonder. I still ask that question to myself all the time. And what I did make it to college, to my mom's and my dad's liking. And what became very clear to me at that point, and as I start learning, is that you're right. You have to be yourself because everybody else is already taken. Mm-hmm. And because there were not a lot of people, when I went to college, there were not a lot of role models. I didn't have any other women or any other person with my background that was a teacher. I didn't have any of those to look for. So when I started working, the one thing that was constant was technology and was the internet. And so it was the early 90s. We were walking around with those big cell phones, and email was a very strange thing. And so I started to realize that every single industry and every single life was going to be transformed by the power of the internet and the power of technology. And so in that moment, I made it my goal to be part of that revolution, to be part of that transformation, so that through technology, we could make the world a little bit better and a little bit more open. And so that took a lot of very different routes, but I realized that most of that innovation was happening in the US, and I was in my native Spain where that was not going to happen. And I tried so many different ways to come here. I tried to get a job through, relationships, people that I had met. That could have been an option, but then I couldn't get a visa, and immigration was not easy at the time. And so I finally figured out how to do it. I got a scholarship to come to the US to go to business school. That was my door. I knew that I wasn't coming back. I knew that this was my playground, and I knew that I was going to make a career and a life out of all of this. And over the years, it's taken a few different shapes. But every time I look back, I'll tell you, I think a lot about the plan and the vision. All of the teams that I've worked with do this practice that is almost my annual planning. We call it the fast forward vision. At the beginning of the year, I always tell my team, so now we are in so it is July, almost July 2019. I tell them, it is July 2020. And you look back at the amazing year that you just closed. Why made it special? How did it feel to go to work? What did you achieve in your professional life? And what did you achieve in your personal life? And write it. Only 2 pages. When you write that, it really crystallizes what you can. It opens the possibilities of what you can see happen within a year. And then after you write it, you share it. Because when you share it, it becomes not only your commitment to yourself, it becomes your commitment with everybody that you work with and everybody that you share it with. And so I always have this balance between what does my next year look like and what do I want to do in 10 years? And I never know what happens in between, which leaves you open for different job opportunities, for different places to live, for different people to meet. And I love that element of surprise. I always realize that at the long term, my passion to be part of the transformation that technology can represent to our lives is it's been my conductive tissue over the years. But it is this idea of opening possibilities every year and doing it alongside all of the people that you work with and that you love and that you live with and that you grow with that really keeps it going.
Absolutely. So Sadira, I'm going to bring it back to you. Obviously, you had an incredible run, particularly over the last decade. What keeps you up at night? Like, how do you, because obviously you've overcome a lot and love the story about coming to New York, but even now, like, what are some of the things you're concerned with and how do you deal with that?
Well, there are a few things that keep me up. There's, we talk a lot about fear. I will tell you, fear is not a thing that, at least for me, it has not gone away. No matter how much I've achieved or what I've gone through on the journey, there's still, I find myself in rooms that I never imagined I'd be. This is one of them on this stage, and like, wow, I get to share a perspective and people are listening. There's the narrative that sometimes can play, particularly in being a woman, of the what will they say, what will they think? Like, can I show up as myself? Like, I wear sneakers, will they think I'm not as professional? The curly hair, like, it could be a lot. What will they think? Will they think I'm not polished? And so there's always, like, that sometimes keeps me up at night of continuing to have that brave conversation and that bravery to continue showing up in all of my magic, right? I just talked about that. I know it's not an easy thing, particularly as I get into rooms where people look very differently than me, and they haven't had the opportunity to get to know me. And I need to build relationships with them. Or even as I found, you may find in your career that your race starts to pick up pace. And you go from being a leader among leaders to a leader of other leaders, where folks that you're starting with, you may become their managers or that boss, and like, that is awkward. It's great, but there's no playbook for that, or how do you navigate that? And it's a really tricky one. And as a woman, right, that narrative of, gosh, I still want to fit in. I still, like, I want to be one of the crew, but now I need to manage this group of leaders. Will they still respect me? Will they think differently about me? Do they think that I deserve this? And, I say that's something that keeps me up, because it's the loudest voice in any room is always the one that's in your head. And it's the most powerful one because you talk to yourself, at least I do, and I talk to myself a lot, more than anyone. And how do you use that voice in your head to build yourself up and not be a deterrent and to continue to use that?
Wow, that's very powerful. I mean, Martin, you have to drive business results, right? So, I mean, can you build a little bit on what Sadira was talking about and say, how do you actually sell, right? Like in an environment where you have to navigate internally being the only person sometimes, right? As you mentioned to the crowd, but now you're the only person and you're also trying to get them to do business with you. Like, how do you navigate that? I mean, I literally would love to hear.
That's a great question, Steve. It's not easy. It's a craft that you really have to take particular time to build, because I know many of us, maybe all of us, we go into meetings with clients or companies, whether you're selling or you're doing a partnership or whatever the case may be, and they haven't met you before. And I know when I was coming up in business, the earlier years, there was no LinkedIn, there was no social media where people can get a snapshot of who I am. They're basically reading my title or maybe an email, and then you walk into the room and 9.9 times out of 10, there's this awkward pause where it's kind of a, oh. You're Martin? And so, has that happened? Okay, so, after you go through that about 10,000 times, you start to build your strategy. And in some cases, you can be 3, maybe 5, maybe 15 steps ahead because you already know they're going to have that pause. And you need to think about what you're going to be doing as a result of that pause. So you talk about playbooks and scripts, but you build this out and you know exactly how this meeting's going to go because you're in control. You trust yourself, you're powerful, you're intelligent, you're going to drive results. Their head is spinning, maybe not, but you're able to kind of drive that forward. And so for me, it's really about trusting in yourself, really building that respect before they may trust you, or I should say they, but anyone you're meeting with, it doesn't matter, who they are, what race, color, or creed, or title. Respect comes first. I've always been the type of person where, I love people, I like to make friends, but I don't really need to be your friend. I'd much rather you respect me, and, maybe we can be friends somewhere along the way because that's what's driving the result.
I mean, there's a couple themes that I'm just gleaming, right? We talked about overcoming fears. Obviously, we talked about courage. Marta, I wanted to have you speak a little bit on something you shared with me earlier in the day, like authenticity. You're obviously a leader at one of the world's biggest information platforms. You're helping spearhead a lot of their initiatives, particularly around women and diversity. Yeah. But at the same token, you're your unique self. So how do you not get lost in this giant system that you're representing? Yeah,
I think many times we spend years and every day of our life trying to fit in, trying to be like everybody else, trying to do what everybody else does. And for me, that meant in an environment where when I first started working, there were maybe 3% or 4% women and all of the others were white guys. It was quite different. I remember that we all had to wear suits and they didn't sell suits for women. So I had one made to measure that had like the shape. So at least it was a little bit girly. But I do realize that I started trying to play with the boys' code so that I could do that, or that I could win. It wasn't until later when I got to work with amazing people. One of them was Ariana Huffington, and she used to talk about this nasty roommate in her head, a little bit what you were saying before. It wasn't until I was surrounded by a group of really strong women that I understood that you didn't have to play to the others' rules, and that if you brought your entire self to work every day, and if you share the vulnerabilities, and if you share the challenges that you were having, You know, I have an accent. This is not my first or second or third language, so it was really hard for me sometimes to speak up in meetings until I realized that the accent was kind of cool. And but those are things that I had never shared, and I had never shared the fears that I had walking into a meeting, or how nervous I would get before I had any specific presentation. And so I think that at one point I started to become really comfortable with sharing those vulnerabilities. And when I did that, there were so many people in my teams, so many peers, and even, you know, people that I admired that were leaders in these organizations that would come to me and say, thank you for doing that, because you're making it okay for all of us to, you know, to feel okay and to realize that it's part of our journey to do, you know, or to learn from each one of those pieces. And I'll tell you, now I am in an organization that has a tremendous culture that does a lot of work to create an environment where we all feel very comfortable and we can all bring ourselves to work and have a good life and bring, you know, have a high-performing life and a high-performing career at the same time. But it's also a company that has a huge responsibility when it comes to almost every decision we make. And I take that extremely, I think I take that extremely serious. I take very serious the fact that I need to be very thoughtful, but the thoughtfulness and the strategy and everything we do should never be detached from who we are and the humanity and the freshness and the different perspectives that we bring to everything we do every day. So one of the things that happens at Google is sometimes, you know, we make decisions and they give us these things that we call the comm docs. I'm sure you guys have comm docs in your, they tell us these are the lines, this is what we need, this is what we can tell our clients based on the decisions that we have made. And so what I always say, and this is true and it's really important, I think, for all of us, I have the comm doc and I have to help us understand what the world and what the decisions that we make hold for us. And so I have to bring the rigor, the discipline, and everything that comes through with every decision we make as a company with my personal perspective and with that very human touch that helps us make the right decisions. So those are two of the things that I always look at, especially in the environment in which we are today, in which every decision that we make has a global impact and happens in real time and it's always on. And so that's how I think about that.
Wow. I mean, the whole point of this panel is becoming more professional. And I think you guys have all touched on it in various unique ways. Before we leave, you know, this is open for any of the three of you. What does being a professional truly mean to you?
I'll jump in. Hopefully this gets to the answer.
Yeah.
I think for me, being a professional is about always showing up with the values that I carry with me. And I think as leaders, emerging leaders, particularly in our climate right now, what I'd say is what is popular is not always right, and what is right is not always popular. And being a leader and being a professional is operating with the highest level of integrity. And you're gonna find yourself in situations where you may have to go against popularity because that's the right thing. Particularly because a lot of you may be the only in the rooms you find yourselves in. And so be mindful of the things that you're promoting by giving permission to them and calling that out. Yeah. And so can you live with those decisions that you're making and what you're allowing? And to me, that is being a professional operating with that high level of integrity.
Yeah, you killed that. Enough said on that one. Enough said. So last but not least, any parting words for the audience?
So I have one. So because of the environments in which we all grew up, we've always, you know, our parents have always told us you have to work double as hard and you have to be double as smart to get to where, you know, most people will normally get without the same amount of effort. And because of that, I feel like we all really think about working hard. It's ingrained in how we all make it where we are. And sometimes we forget to enjoy the ride. And so when you think about every step that you make in your career, think not only about getting to a specific point, think about enjoying the ride every day. Think about what you bring of your personal experiences to work with you every day that makes you better. I have learned a tremendous amount about leadership and coaching being a mom. Because when you are a mom and you have to convince your kids to go to bed at 8, it's much easier if you tell them, are you going to bed at 7:30 or 7:45? Than if you tell them you have to go to bed by 8. And so take those everyday experiences, whether it is in parenting, whether it is in your friendship life, whether it is in your relationship with your parents, whether it is in your hobbies, your sports. Oh, sports are amazing. Amazing parallel for everything we do at work. Take those and make them part of who you are and have fun with all of it, because it's all about having fun in the ride.
Absolutely. Martin, any last words?
Sure. Last words. I mean, certainly one of the things that I would definitely recommend to the group is really, be resilient, trust in yourself, trust your instincts. It's funny when you look at resumes and you look at careers and you see how people progress and they've been successful or not successful. It's not easy. Every day is not perfect. And there are going to be many situations that you may have already found yourselves in that you didn't expect. And it's really about waking up that next morning and staying strong to your convictions and just moving forward with style and grace and confidence. And you have to do that, rinse, wash, and repeat, and it continues and continues and continues. So as much as we can sit up here and say that, hey, we've done some really neat things in our careers, they did not come without pain. They did not come without those really, really tough days where you have to do the gut check and say, okay, is it worth it? But I would just to steal one of your lines and just talking to yourself and really owning into your inner dopeness, just know who you are and let that drive you, and you'll get there.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I hope everyone, will give a round of applause to all three panelists. It's been and I say this with all sincerity. At the end of the day, it's such a tremendous honor that you guys were able to share the authenticity, the stories of courage, and frankly, just having fun. Yeah. And so if I would leave one last parting word is that, at the end of the day, you are a collection of your actions. Some of them good, some of them bad, and talking to yourself is a key. We use a thing at Parkwood, we call it the GPS formula. When you hop into a car, the first thing you do is plug in where you want to go. That is a subjective decision. Objectively, it knows where you are. But when you miss a turn, right, it doesn't holler at you. It talks to you in a very monotone. If you miss two turns, it doesn't raise its voice. If you miss 3, it just reroutes you. The only thing that changes is time and distance. So watch how you take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself in the right way, don't expect anyone else to.
That's right.
And so it's just a very. So I thank the panelists, I thank John and the rest of the team at MLT, and hope you guys have a blessed day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.